Look at this image. The working class, fists raised, bathed in red and gold. Bold, confident, with an undeniable revolutionary fervor. This poster was plastered on factory walls, in schools, and in homes all across China during the 1960s and 70s. It was designed for one audience, the Chinese people, and it told them one story, that you are the revolution. In this image, Chinese workers and soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with African and Latin American figures, united under a banner of anti-imperialism. This poster wasn't made to hang in a Chinese living room, however. It was made for the world, to tell the global South that we are your leader. The same government and era, yet completely different stories. This contrast begs the question, how did the Chinese Communist Party use propaganda posters to project two entirely different versions of China at the same time? And what does that gap reveal about how the CCP understood power? To understand this, we need to step back to 1949. The founding of the People's Republic of China. When Mao Zedong's Communist Party took power, they inherited a country that was largely rural, and where a significant portion of the population was illiterate. Traditional forms of communication, such as newspapers and written pamphlets, couldn't reach everyone, so the CCP turned to visual art. Propaganda posters became the government's most powerful communication tool. They were cheap to produce, easy to distribute, and required no literacy to understand. As scholar Stefan Landsberger documents in his Chinese Posters project, after 1949, propaganda posters played a major role in the many campaigns that mobilized the people and became the favored medium for educational purposes. They could easily reach the large number of illiterate Chinese. But the CCP wasn't just talking to its own people. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, China was also locked in an ideological rivalry with the Soviet Union for influence over newly decolonizing nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The world was watching, and the CCP knew it needed a different message for a different audience. So, their solution? They ran two campaigns simultaneously, one inward towards their own Chinese people and one outward to the globe. And the visual difference between them is striking.
Let's start with what China was telling its own people. Domestic propaganda during the Mao era had one central goal: unite the Chinese people around the idea of class struggle and loyalty to the party. The heroes of these posters are always the same: peasants, factory workers, soldiers, etc. They were known as the Lao Boy Xing, meaning the common people. And notice what these figures look like. Men and women alike had stereotypical masculinized bodies. They were dressed in gray, army green, or worker peasant blue, and their faces were done according to a limited standard repertoire of acceptable examples. Gender distinctions were deliberately erased. Everyone was the same, equal, and strong. The subjects were represented hyper-realistically as ageless, larger-than-life peasants, soldiers, workers, and educated youth in dynamic poses. Their strong and healthy bodies functioned as metaphors for the strong and healthy productive classes the state wanted to propagate. And then there's Mao himself. He could be depicted as a benevolent father, bringing mechanisms of popular obedience into play, or portrayed as a wise statesman, an astute military leader, or great teacher. In many posters, Mao appeared in all kinds of situations, inspecting factories, standing with peasant workers, flanked by strong, healthy, ageless men, and masculinized women, or just by himself, propagating his power. The message being sent to the Chinese public was consistent. China is a nation of heroes. You, the worker, the farmer, the soldier, are the backbone of this revolution, and Mao is the sun. This was identity construction on a massive scale. Posters were instructions telling Chinese citizens who they were supposed to be. Now let's look at what China was telling the rest of the world. Starting in the early 1960s, the CCP began producing a new category of posters that depicted Chinese figures standing alongside people from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The visual language was dramatically different than the earlier posters. Gone was the inward-focused imagery of worker solidarity, and in its place was a global stage with China at the focus. Mao had become convinced that Africa would become the battlefield where the power of the West could be destroyed, and the world revolution could be started, and that China, instead of the Soviet Union, could be the leader of this historical struggle. These forms of international solidarity aimed to increase the influence of the PRC among Africans and globally. China was presenting itself as a model for anti-colonial struggle, and not just a nation that has won its own revolution. And it was a guide for everyone else still fighting. Scholar Jeffrey Friedman in Shadow Cold War traces how China used this third worldist messaging as a direct challenge to Soviet leadership and the communist bloc. China wasn't just making friends, it was making an argument that they understand their struggle better than Moscow does because they have lived it. While China gave the support, it was mostly only symbolic given its own level of development. However, it was still one of the most internationally oriented eras in Chinese propaganda, occurring at a time when the country itself exhibited internal xenophobia. At the very same moment, China was producing posters of warm international brotherhood for foreign audiences. The Cultural Revolution was raging at home, with intense suspicion of foreigners and anything deemed un-Chinese. This essentially created a world of two Chinas running at the same time.
When you put these two sets of posters side by side, the contrast is almost jarring. Domestic posters are claustrophobic in their focus. Always China, always the Chinese people, always the internal struggle. The color palette is still red and gold. The figures are idealized Chinese workers, and the enemy is abstract. Imperialism, capitalism, class enemies. External posters open up. They're populated with multiracial groups, they name specific countries and liberation movements, and they position China not as a nation building itself, but as a leader already arrived on the world stage. The CCP was, in essence, running two brand campaigns simultaneously. For these Chinese citizens, you are the revolution. For the third world, we will lead your revolution. These messages aren't contradictory on the surface, but look closer. The domestic poster asks Chinese people to struggle and sacrifice. The external poster presents China as a confident, already powerful liberator. One shows a nation in the middle of becoming, the other shows a nation that has already become. This gap is what scholars like Landsberger and Friedman study separately, but don't really compare directly. Our argument is that comparing them is the most revealing thing you can do, because the gap between those two images shows exactly how deliberately the CCP constructed China's identity depending on its audience. The Mao-era propaganda machine was one of the most sophisticated image operations of the 20th century. It tailored messages to every audience, sometimes to the point of contradiction. To its people, China was a nation of heroic workers building a new world from the ground up. To the world, China was already that new world, a revolutionary beacon for the oppressed. Both images were carefully constructed and served the CCP's political goals. And both, in their own ways, worked, at least for a time. What this tells us is something important about propaganda as a tool of power. It's not about the truth of what you say, it's about the audience that you're saying it to. The CCP understood this better than almost anyone, and the posters they left behind, vivid, beautiful, and extremely calculated, are the evidence.